Janelle Brown had stayed in silence for years. The world watched her family unravel on television, but she barely raised her voice, told her story barely, and reacted publicly very rarely. She had built her life on a keel of balance and calm, holding fragile peace even as everything around her fractured. But now, after years of silence, Janelle is finally ready to tell the truth about what really happened with Kody Brown and why she had no choice but to walk away. She tried for over 2 decades to believe in the dream Kody sold, a big family, one built on faith, unity, and love. In the early years, it almost worked. She admired his energy, his leadership, his vision. Yet somewhere along the way, the dream became something else, a life in which control replaced love, and fairness became a story told only for the cameras. Janelle was different from the other wives, pragmatic, down-to-earth, a woman appreciative of independence. She worked hard, built businesses, and carried herself with quiet strength. Never the type of wife that had to seek validation or support from others every minute, she sought partnership, not power. But what she did not quite realize then was that this calmness was one day going to be mistaken for compliance. Over time, she watched as the family's balance began to disappear. Decisions were made without her having a say. The conversations were one-sided. The partnership began to feel more and more like a hierarchy. Kody's attention, once divided among his wives, slowly narrowed to one. The rest of them, most especially Janelle, were supposed to adjust. When the move to Flagstaff happened, Janelle was hoping it would be a fresh start, a new home, new energy, an opportunity to reconnect. Instead, it marked the beginning of the end. Tensions were higher than ever, money was tighter, and Kody's focus was elsewhere. He started setting rules that didn't make sense, rules that felt less like protection and more like punishment. Everything came crashing down during the pandemic. Janelle tried to be reasonable, but Kody's restrictions and demands became unbearable. He wanted control over how everyone lived, whom they saw, and where they went. Always rational, Janelle would not allow him to boss her around, making choices for her and distancing her from the grown children. That was the point at which that defiance sparked something in him: anger, resentment, and the belief that Janelle was no longer loyal. In one now infamous argument, Kody accused her of not being supportive, of not following his leadership. Janelle, calm but firm, told him the truth. She was tired of walking on eggshells, tired of pretending that their family was united when it was falling apart. For the first time, her voice rose. She told him she wouldn't live under control disguised as love. It was the moment that would change everything. It was only after that confrontation that Janelle started seeing things clearly. Love based on conditions isn't love at all, it's leverage. No amount of loyalty could fix what had been broken. She had spent decades being the peacekeeper, the steady hand in the chaos, but even she had her limits. Kody wanted obedience, not partnership, and Janelle was done living quietly in somebody else's shadow. Leaving wasn't easy. Janelle had built her whole adult life around the Brown family, her children, her house, her faith, all tied to that world. But as she watched Kody's relationship with Robin grow stronger and his relationships with everyone else grow weaker, she understood something vital. Staying would mean losing herself completely. The day she finally walked away, there wasn't any dramatic fight or big scene, just silence. She packed her things, took a deep breath, and chose peace. It wasn't rebellion, it was self-preservation. Over the next several months, Janelle began to come alive. She was rediscovering herself. The woman who wanted to be invisible now was radiant, building a business, enjoying time with her children, traveling, and laughing without any inhibitions. For the first time in several years, she did not have to consult with anyone before making a decision. When she finally did speak publicly, she didn't attack or insult Kody. That's just not who she is. Instead, she spoke with honesty and grace. She said that she had loved him deeply once, that she still wished him peace, but that she couldn't stay in a marriage that no longer made her feel respected or valued. "I chose myself," she said, simply. And those 3 words hit harder than any scandal or accusation ever could. The reality behind the scenes, however, was far more complex. According to Janelle, the emotional distance had grown over many years before fanside. She had tried to keep the family together even when feeling so disconnected, And what she wanted was a husband who treated her as an equal, not one who wanted to lead and not listen. Janelle also spoke to the struggle of watching her children suffer under the tension. Some had strained relationships with Kody, and she often found herself caught between defending their right to be independent and keeping peace with their father. The stress of that balancing act wore on her, and at one juncture, she confessed that she felt completely broken. But Janelle is nothing if not resilient. She turned that pain into strength. She refocused her attention on her own goals, her health, her business, and her happiness. Fans noticed the change in her immediately. Her smile was different, her confidence returned. The quiet, steady wife had become a woman standing tall in her own power. Meanwhile, Kody couldn't understand why she would leave. He called her independent to a fault and said she didn't need him. He didn't realize that independence had never been the problem. It was the foundation of who she was. The strength which once drew him to her was the reason now that she couldn't stay. In subsequent interviews, Janelle said she does not regret any of her time in the Plural family, nor does she idealize it. She sees it for what it was, a chapter that taught her about love, faith, and endurance, but also boundaries and self-worth. You can love someone and still walk away, she said. Sometimes that's the only way to save yourself. Her story has resonated deeply with fans, women especially, who have watched her evolution from quiet support to powerful independence. She represents something much greater than reality television. She represents every person who has stayed silent for too long, every person who chose peace over chaos, every person who finally realized they deserved more. The difference in Janelle's life today could not be more stark. She's focused on her health journey, her business, and her children. She's built a life filled with freedom and purpose. She still maintains a sense of calm, still avoids drama whenever she can, but she no longer sacrifices herself to keep others comfortable. She speaks her truth with dignity, not anger. Her relationship with Kody is distant now. They occasionally speak about family matters, but the emotional connection is gone. And though he has tried to frame her departure as disloyalty, Janelle doesn't respond to criticism. She lets her life speak for itself. She says now that the silence she kept for so long wasn't weakness, it was survival. She stayed quiet to protect her children, to keep the peace, to honor a commitment. But since that peace no longer rests on her silence, she's ready to live loudly, honestly, and freely. Janelle's truth isn't about revenge or exposure, it is about freedom. It is about finally understanding that love without respect is empty. Family without fairness will ultimately crumble. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. By the time Janelle Brown finally spoke, she didn't have to scream. Her soft, clear voice held a power that nobody expected. She reminded the world that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks softly, but when it does speak, it changes everything. Her story isn't just the story of a marriage ending. It's the story of a woman reclaiming herself after years of compromise. It's the story of quiet courage, of truth spoken without bitterness, of a life rebuilt with dignity. And as the cameras continue to follow the Brown family, one thing is clear. Janelle's chapter isn't about loss, it's about liberation. She may have walked away from Kody, but she walked straight into herself. And that's the kind of ending that deserves to be told. When Janelle walked away, her world didn't fall apart, it opened up. There was silence in her home, finally, for the first time in decades. But it wasn't the tense kind she'd grown used to. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own thoughts again. She didn't have to check in with anyone or brace herself for confrontation. She could just breathe. In those first months, she just worked on getting to know herself again. She spent more time with her kids, took spontaneous road trips, and dove into her business with newfound drive. All these years, she'd played the role of the wife who held everything together. Now, she was finally living for herself. She said it felt strange at first. Freedom always does, when you've spent so long asking for permission to exist. Behind the scenes, Janelle and Kody's relationship continued to fall apart in full public view. The cameras captured pieces of their last fights, moments that would be rewound and replayed by fans ad infinitum. In those clips, you saw what two people who once shared a dream now stood on opposite sides of an emotional battlefield. Kody blamed her independence, Janelle blamed his control. But in reality, it was the slow, quiet choices through the years that had whittled down the trust. Janelle didn't deny the pain in interviews, but neither did she dwell on it. She said she still loved parts of the life they built, but she couldn't pretend it worked anymore. I kept trying to make it make sense, she admitted, but sometimes love just isn't enough when respect is gone. While the world argued about who was right, Janelle kept calm. She didn't attack, didn't post angry rants, didn't feed the drama. Instead, she let her peace do the talking. Fans noticed her glow returning, her confidence, her humor, her warmth. They said she looked happier than in years, and she was. For when you finally stop fighting for someone who has already let go, it's then you finally have energy to fight for yourself. But freedom came with reflection, too. Janelle spent long nights thinking about what kept her silent for so long. She realized she had been afraid of breaking the family, of disappointing her children, of being judged. She had convinced herself that endurance was strength. Now she understood that real strength is knowing when to stop enduring. Her children became her greatest support. The kind of quiet that lets you hear your own thoughts again. She didn't have to check in with anyone or brace herself for confrontation. She could just breathe. In those first months, she just worked on getting to know herself again. She spent more time with her kids, took spontaneous road trips, and dove into her business with newfound drive. All these years, she'd played the role of the wife who held everything together. Now, she was finally living for herself. She said it felt strange at first. Freedom always does when you've spent so long asking for permission to exist. Behind the scenes, Janelle and Kody's relationship continued to fall apart in full public view. The cameras captured pieces of their last fights, moments that would be rewound and replayed by fans ad infinitum. In those clips, you saw what two people who once shared a dream now stood on opposite sides of an emotional battlefield. Kody blamed her independence. Janelle blamed his control. But in reality, it was the slow, quiet choices through the years that had whittled down the trust. Janelle didn't deny the pain in interviews, but neither did she dwell on it. She said she still loved parts of the life they built, but she couldn't pretend it worked anymore. I kept trying to make it make sense, she admitted, but sometimes love just isn't enough when respect is gone. While the world argued over who was right, Janelle kept calm. She didn't attack, didn't post angry rants, didn't feed the drama. Instead, she let her peace do the talking. Fans noticed her glow returning, her confidence, her humor, her warmth. They said she looked happier than in years, and she was. For when you finally stop fighting for someone who was already let go, it's then you finally have energy to fight for yourself. But freedom came with reflection, too. Janelle spent long nights thinking about what kept her silent for so long. She realized she had been afraid of breaking the family, of disappointing her children, of being judged. She had convinced herself that endurance was strength. Now, she understood that real strength is knowing when to stop enduring. Her children became her greatest support. They stood by her decision, proud of her courage. She spoke often about how her relationship with them deepened after leaving Kody. Without the tension, they could laugh again. She said, "My kids reminded me who I was. They saw my worth even when I'd forgotten it." Professionally, Janelle started to blossom. Throwing herself into health and business ventures, she became an inspiration to the thousands of women that followed her journey online. She spoke about growth, about resilience, about starting over at any age. Every post, every video carried quiet strength, the kind that comes from surviving without bitterness. Meanwhile, Kody continued to speak publicly about his version of events, often shifting blame, sometimes admitting regret. But Janelle didn't respond. She didn't need to. Every time she smiled, every time she spoke about peace, she told her truth more powerfully than any argument could. Months later, in a reunion special, Janelle was asked what she would say to Kody if he were sitting beside her. She paused for a moment and said, "I'd thank him. Because losing that marriage taught me who I am." The audience went silent. It wasn't spiteful. It was real. It was closure. As the show progressed, Janelle became the quiet heart of the sister wives story, not the loudest voice, but the one that resonated deepest. She represented something relatable to the fans, the strength to know when to leave a situation no longer suited for you, and the grace to do it without hate. Her life now is simpler but richer. She travels, she works, she laughs freely. The weight she carried for years is gone. She often says she's not looking for another relationship, not because she's bitter, but because she's whole. "I don't need to be completed," she said. "I'm already complete." For Janelle Brown, breaking her silence wasn't about revenge or validation. It was about truth, her truth. And, in telling it, she gave countless others permission to find their voices too. Because, in the end, her story isn't about a marriage that failed. It's about a woman who finally stopped shrinking herself to fit inside someone else's version of love, and learned that her own peace was worth everything she left behind. Months turned into years, and Janelle's new chapter began to feel natural. The pain had softened into perspective, and the woman who once stood quietly beside Kody now firmly stood in her own light. She wasn't defined anymore by what she had left behind. She was defined by what she had built since. Her independence was no longer a reaction, it was a choice. She learned to be alone without the feeling of loneliness. She could wake up and decide how her day would turn out without waiting for someone else's approval. That freedom wasn't glamorous, but it was powerful. It was peace in its purest form. Fans would usually ask her if she missed the past, the family, the cameras, the sense of belonging. And her response would always be truthful. "Of course I miss parts of it. But sometimes what we miss isn't the person or the place, it's who we were back then. And I'm not that woman anymore." In the quiet of her new life, Janelle started paying more attention to what would be truly important: her children, her health, and her purpose. She poured her energy into growing her business and helping other women rebuild their confidence. She knew what it felt like to lose yourself trying to keep everyone else happy, and she wanted to make sure others didn't have to learn that lesson the hard way. She started speaking at events on self-worth and emotional independence. She wasn't a motivational speaker in the traditional sense. She didn't preach or dramatize. She simply told the truth. Her voice was calm, steady, and real. "I thought strength meant staying," she said once. "Now, I know strength means knowing when it's time to go." That simple line went viral online. It resonated with thousands of people, men and women alike, who had stayed in a relationship or situations out of duty, guilt, or fear. Janelle had become more than a reality TV figure. She was a symbol of quiet strength and self-respect. It wasn't a perfect journey, though. Healing never is. There were nights when loneliness hit unexpectedly, when she caught herself scrolling through old photos and wondering how things might have been different. But every time that sadness came, she reminded herself of one thing: peace was worth every ounce of heartbreak it cost to find it. One of the most moving moments was the reunion she made with some of her children for a family vacation. They rented a small cabin, no cameras, no drama, just laughter, cooking, and stories. One evening around the fire, one of her sons turned to her and said, "Mom, you seem lighter now." And she smiled, saying, "That's because I finally stopped carrying things that weren't mine to carry." Her relationship with the other wives had indeed changed. Over time, she and Christine bonded on similar wounds, similar courage. They talked about healing, faith, and joy again. Together, they represented a new kind of sisterhood, not bound in marriage to the same man, but by mutual understanding and survival. Meanwhile, Kody remained the subject of public speculation, the media following his every move, his strained relationships with his wives, and his attempts to explain where it all went wrong. But Janelle didn't watch, didn't comment, and didn't look back. Once, she said, "When you close a door, stop standing in the doorway. You can't move forward if you keep staring at what's behind you." And as the years went by, Janelle began posting glimpses into her life online, small moments of joy, pictures of her cooking, hiking, laughing with her kids. They weren't crafted for attention, they were expressions of gratitude. In every post was a message: happiness doesn't come from who you're with, it comes from who you are when you're finally free to be yourself. Her story reached a new audience, people who had never watched Sister Wives but found themselves relating to her message. They weren't seeing her as the wife, but as a woman who has been through fire and came out glowing. She became an unlikely and quiet icon of resilience. One evening, during an interview, the host asked her, "If you could go back and talk to your younger self, the one just entering that life, what would you say?" Janelle thought for a moment and said softly, "I'd tell her she's enough. She doesn't have to prove her worth by staying in places that don't see it." That quote went everywhere. People printed it, shared it, and used it for their own reminder. It became her signature line, the one that was gentle but powerful. She would always say that the real test of healing isn't how far you've moved from your pain, it's how kindly you can remember it. And Janelle did remember kindly. She didn't erase her past, she honored it as part of her story. Every struggle, every tear, every moment of doubt, all of it shaped the woman she had become. It was years after her breakup that Janelle's world became much smaller but happier. She lives quietly today, surrounded by family and peace. Her definition of success is no longer money or fame, but calm mornings, evenings filled with laughter, and living a truthful life. She doesn't seek attention, and yet, when she speaks, people listen. Because her story is not of just one woman leaving a marriage, but of the universal truth that every human being deserves respect, is loved, and has the right to choose happiness, even if it means walking away. And maybe that's why Janelle's voice still matters, because she didn't shout her truth, she lived it. She proved that silence can hold strength, that peace can follow pain, and even after years of compromise, it's never too late to begin again. By the time a few more years had passed, Janelle Brown had found something she didn't even know she was missing: purpose. Freedom had taught her peace, but purpose gave that peace meaning. The woman who once kept quiet to maintain balance now spoke openly in order to help others find their own. It started small: a podcast interview, a guest panel, a conversation about strength and identity. But every time she spoke, the response was overwhelming.